"We'll visit when we have time," Chloe said, smiling like it was kindness. I just nodded and poured more tea, though my hand shook a little. Time, I realized, was her polite way of saying never. If you've ever waited too long for love to arrive, like and share this story, and tell me where you're listening from. My name is Margaret Ellison, and I am 67 years old. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, in the same White House where my husband and I raised our son, Evan. The walls still hum with the sound of his childhood tiny footsteps on the stairs, Saturday cartoons, the faint smell of pancakes and pine cleaner. My husband, Robert, has been gone for 5 years now. He left quietly one morning, his coffee still half full on the porch table. Since then, silence has become both my company and my teacher. For most of my life, I worked as a school librarian. Books trained me to notice details, the weight of pauses, the way people arrange their words when they mean something else. I live simply. My days start with tea, a walk around the block, and tending to the small patch of garden Robert loved, lilies in spring, rosemary year-round. He said every plant needs 2 things, attention and space. I've come to believe people are the same. My son, Evan, is 38 now. He's a project manager for a tech firm in Charlotte, the kind of job that makes him check emails even on Sundays. He's kind, but practical to a fault. My daughter-in-law, Chloe, is 35, a brand designer with perfect posture and a mind always sprinting ahead. She speaks in quick sentences, always half distracted by her next task. I admired her ambition when they first married. I still do, though lately, it feels like she's racing time itself. Then there's Leo, my grandson, my small son. He's 7, curious, and unfiltered in that way children are before the world teaches them politeness. He loves building towers from anything that stacks and drawing things no one else can see. He once told me, "Grandma, you smell like quiet bread," which I decided was the best compliment I'd ever received. When they visit, the house comes alive again. Leo runs from room to room shouting discoveries. Chloe sets her phone on speaker while answering work calls, and Evan apologizes for both with tired smiles. But lately, their visits have grown fewer. Excuses come with soft laughter, deadlines, late meetings, flu season. I nod, always pretending it doesn't sting. I remember one Sunday, I'd baked an apple pie just in case they dropped by. They didn't. I left it on the counter overnight, untouched. The next morning, I cut a slice for breakfast. It tasted fine, but not right. Food, I think, knows when it's been waited on. Still, I never complained. I told myself every family has seasons, some near, some far. But the truth is quieter and sharper. Love that depends on scheduling is the loneliest kind. My neighbor, Helen, once told me, "Margaret, you raised your son to be independent. You can't fault him for flying." I smiled and said, "No, but I can miss the sound of his wings." I try to stay grateful. Gratitude is my daily discipline, though some days it feels like sweeping leaves in a windstorm. I fill the hours with small rituals, organizing recipes, calling old colleagues, sending birthday cards to people who forget mine. It's not sadness, really. It's maintenance. I tell myself that families are not meant to orbit perfectly. They drift and return, like tides. But lately, it feels as if my shore has gone still. The phone rings less, the visits shrink shorter, and sometimes I wonder if I'm keeping a museum rather than a home. If you've ever stood in a house full of memories and realized the living no longer visit, you'll understand the quiet ache that follows. It isn't anger, it's recognition. Thanksgiving has always been my favorite holiday. It's the only one that asks nothing more than gratitude and company. That year, I began preparing early, polishing silver, ironing linens, planning the menu the way I used to when Robert was alive. I made a list written in neat librarian's handwriting: 1 turkey, 2 pies, Leo's favorite mac and cheese. I imagined their laughter filling the dining room, Evan carving the turkey, Chloe arranging napkins just so. It was tradition, and tradition, to me, was a way of saying we still belong to each other. I called them the Monday before Thanksgiving. Chloe answered on speaker, her voice bright and efficient. "Oh, Margaret, we were just talking about you," she said. "We've got such a crazy week. Evan's got meetings, and I'm finishing a project. We'll visit when we have time." The words floated in the air for a moment before they landed. I smiled into the phone, pretending they hadn't bruised. "Of course," I said. "Time has a way of finding us." I hung up and stared at the table. It was set already, even though it was still 4 days away. The morning light slipped through the window, cutting across the silver candlesticks like a quiet truth. No one was coming. I thought about calling again, about insisting, but dignity often arrives dressed as silence. I told myself they'd surprise me, that they'd drive up after dinner, maybe bring leftovers to laugh about. But Thanksgiving came and went, and the only sound in the house was the steady tick of the clock. That night, I roasted the turkey anyway. The smell filled the house, but without voices, it felt like memory more than life. I made a single plate, sat at the end of the table, and whispered grace out loud. For love that changes, and for hearts that keep room. I ate slowly, tasting each bite as if it were proof of something. The next morning, I packed leftovers into small containers and drove them to the community center. 3 days later, Evan texted, "Traffic was awful. We stayed local this year. Maybe next weekend?" I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. My reply was simple. Of course, there's always next weekend. But deep down, I knew the pattern. Next weekend meant next month, and next month meant when they remembered. It had been 3 months since their last visit. I checked my calendar and counted the weeks as if I were tracking something medical. I told myself they were busy, modern, practical. Love wasn't gone, it was simply organized differently. Still, I began to notice small absences, Evan's calls shorter, Chloe's texts less personal. Even Leo's little voice on video calls grew distant. "Mommy says you'll come visit when you're not too tired," he'd say. I'd laugh softly. Maybe we'll both surprise her. In the quiet evenings, I started baking bread just to fill the air. The smell reminded me that life still rises if given warmth. I placed a photo of Robert on the counter beside me. "We raised him to be kind," I told the picture. "Not perfect." The photo, of course, didn't answer, but I could almost hear Robert's low chuckle. "Kindness doesn't disappear, Maggie. It just gets busy." A week later, I wrapped a small package for Leo, a book about constellations, something I knew would catch his wonder. I mailed it with a handwritten letter, telling him to look at the stars and find the same ones I saw from my porch. It was my quiet way of keeping the thread between us unbroken. Days passed, then a week. No reply. No thank you. Maybe they forgot to mention it. Maybe forgetting had become their habit. On a gray Sunday, I called Evan again. This time, his voice was strained. "Mom, we're juggling so much. Chloe's under pressure at work. We'll try to visit next month." His tone was gentle, apologetic. I heard exhaustion, not cruelty. "Take care of yourself, son," I said softly. "Don't let love turn into an errand." He laughed weakly, not catching what I meant. That night, I sat in my reading chair and looked. Around the living room, the bookshelves Robert built, the old piano I hadn't touched in years, the guest room waiting like a question. I realized that I'd been living inside a space built for return visits that no longer came. Waiting, I thought, is another form of aging. If you've ever set a table for someone who never arrived, you know that emptiness has its own sound. It isn't loud, it's a whisper that asks, "How long will you keep a chair for someone who never sits down?" Winter settled over Asheville, like a blanket woven from fog. The air carried wood smoke and stillness, and each morning, I told myself that patience was a virtue I still believed in. But somewhere beneath that calm, a question began to turn like a small key. Was I the one waiting, or had they already gone? The first sign came from Leo. It was a video Chloe posted online, her family at a ski resort, bundled in matching coats, laughing around a fire pit. She captioned it, "Finally taking a break, our little family weekend." I watched it twice, then a third time. There was no mention of Thanksgiving missed, no thought of me. Just joy, wrapped neatly in pixels. I couldn't even be angry. I was simply erased. A week later, I stopped by First Asheville Bank, where Robert and I had kept our accounts for decades. My goal was small, to renew a certificate of deposit that was about to mature. The young teller smiled politely. "Let's take a look, Mrs. Ellison," she said, clicking away. Then she frowned slightly. "You also have a joint family emergency account listed here. Would you like to roll that over too?" I blinked. "A family emergency account?" She turned the monitor slightly. "It was set up with your son about 4 years ago, but it hasn't had any activity for 14 months. 14 months, longer than I'd realized since the last deposit. "Could you print me a statement?" I asked quietly. She did, sliding the page across the counter. I thanked her and walked out, the paper folded neatly in my purse. I didn't look at it until I reached the car. The balance was modest, a safety net Robert had once insisted we keep for rainy days. It hadn't rained in a while, but somehow, the roof above us had still cracked. That evening, I placed the statement in a small envelope marked, "Personal." I wasn't angry at Evan. I was informed. A mother learns to read silence like another language. Maybe he'd stopped using the account out of practicality, or maybe it was one more thread quietly severed while I was busy believing we were still tethered. The next morning, I cleaned the guest room. I changed the sheets, dusted the frames, and placed a small vase of pine boughs by the window. I took a photo not for anyone, just for myself, to prove the room still existed, that I was still ready. Then I deleted it minutes later. There was something humiliating about documenting hope. That afternoon, Helen stopped by, carrying her usual brightness in a basket of muffins. "You've been quiet," she said. "More than your usual quiet." I poured her tea and hesitated. "Do you ever feel," I asked, "that the people you love most are slowly moving you to the edge of their world?" She smiled gently. "Yes, but I stopped mistaking that for rejection. Sometimes they're just lost in their own orbit." Helen talked about Willow Harbor, the lakeside community where she'd moved 2 years earlier. "We call it a cooperative," she said. "But really, it's just people choosing peace on purpose." I laughed softly. "That sounds indulgent." She shook her head. "No, it's survival. We all grew up serving others, husbands, children, expectations. Peace doesn't come find us, Margaret. You have to go where it's waiting." After she left, I sat by the window with her words echoing. I thought about the phrase Chloe had used, "We'll visit when we have time." Maybe that was the difference between them and me. They waited for time. I had it already and didn't know what to do with it. Later that night, Evan called. "Mom," he said, "you got the bank statement, right? I just wanted you to know we moved our savings into a new account. I should have told you." His voice sounded guilty, small. "It's fine," I said evenly. "Money's only paper, Evan. Connection's what keeps its value." He was quiet for a moment. "We'll try to visit soon." I smiled into the phone. "When you have time." He didn't notice the echo. After the call, I opened my journal and wrote, 14 months of silence, 14 lines between what we used to be and what we are now. I slid the bank statement between the pages, not as proof, as clarity. The next morning, I looked around the house and saw it differently, not as a home, but as a story nearing its final chapter here. The walls didn't hurt me. They simply reflected back the life I'd already outgrown. I began to wonder, not if they'd visit, but why I was still waiting for them to. If you've ever discovered the truth not in what someone says, but in what they forget to do, you'll understand that quiet heartbreak isn't sudden, it's cumulative. It's the slow erosion of expectation until peace feels like rebellion. Helen called 2 days later, just as I was folding laundry that no one but me would wear. "You sound small," she said without even a hello. I laughed softly. "Maybe I've just run out of large sounds." She told me to come over that weekend to Willow Harbor, the cooperative community she'd joined. "You've hidden in that house long enough, Margaret," she said. "Come see what peace looks like when it doesn't have to wait for anyone." Saturday morning, I packed a small bag and drove the hour to Willow Harbor. The highway curved through bare trees and pale light, the kind that makes winter seem like mercy rather than punishment. The entrance sign read, "A village for living, not waiting." I smiled. Someone there clearly understood. Helen greeted me in a bright yellow sweater, her hair silver and wild. "Welcome to the slow lane," she said, linking her arm through mine. We walked through tidy paths lined with pine and cedar. The cottages were modest but full of life gardens, laughter, music drifting through open windows. "Everyone here used to wait for something," Helen explained. Then they stopped. She introduced me to neighbors who painted, taught yoga, kept bees. No one asked me who I lived for. They only asked what I loved. It felt like stepping into air after years of breathing through glass. That evening, we sat on her porch, watching the lake blush under sunset. "I'm not ready to move anywhere," I said. "I'm not running away." Helen smiled knowingly. "Peace doesn't mean running, darling. It means walking where the noise can't follow." I didn't answer, but the stillness between us felt like agreement. Back in Asheville, the house felt heavier. Every object seemed to whisper obligation. Robert's chair, Evan's boyhood photos, the untouched guest bed. I thought about Willow Harbor, how people there built new rhythms instead of polishing old ghosts. Helen called again the next day. "You don't owe anyone your waiting," she said. "Come stay a week. Bring a book and your stubbornness." That night, I wrote in my journal, "Peace waits in certain places. Maybe I should stop making it wait for me." The season turned without asking me, and my calendar filled with small cancellations. Evan sent 12 texts in 4 months, each one polite and weightless. "Running late again, Mom. Q1 is wild. Can we push?" Leo caught a cold. "Maybe next Sunday." I answered kindly, because kindness had become my armor. Chloe's messages were shorter, mostly pictures of Leo between errands, always smiling at something just out of frame. I started a plain spiral notebook and titled it, The Silence Ledger. On the first page, I wrote down dates, promises, and little notes only I would understand. It wasn't punishment, just a way to stop gaslighting myself with hope. Some nights I read the list aloud until the facts sounded gentle. The truth grew soft edges and stopped trying to hurt me. I drove back to Willow Harbor and stayed a week in a guest cottage. The mornings tasted like quiet, with coffee steaming beside the lake's slow breath. People waved without asking for explanations, and no one hurried me across a sentence. Helen took me to the community garden and handed me a trowel. "Plant anything that forgives forgetfulness," she said, grinning. I chose thyme and marigolds because memory needs both flavor and guardrails. In the afternoons, I joined a reading circle in the library room. We read one chapter at a time, discussing what the characters learned before we moved on. I realized I wanted that rule for my life too. Learn the chapter, then turn the page. At night, I slept without waiting for my phone to light up. Back home, the house greeted me with its usual politeness. The guest bed looked ironed and abandoned. The piano closed like a mouth that had said enough. I put fresh sheets on for myself and left the door open, just to see if air could feel like company. Evan called that Sunday and talked about weather for 5 minutes. "We will come soon," he promised, but his voice didn't know the route. I said, "Drive carefully with your time," and he laughed like I'd made a joke. After the call, I opened the silence ledger and added a single line. "Waiting is a hobby I did not choose." Then I put down the pen and walked to the garden. The rosemary had grown without permission, taking space the way courage does. Chloe posted a polished photo of Leo at a museum, captioned with a cheerful sentence about family weekends. I enlarged it and noticed his hand, reaching off frame towards someone unseen. My chest ached, but not with anger. It felt like holding a glass that's already cracked. It will hold water, just not for long. That night, I pulled Robert's chair to the window and practiced a new prayer. "Bless those who forget me kindly, and teach me to remember myself." The house settled like an old cat and stopped pretending it could purr on command. The next week, Helen called with that particular tenderness older friends reserve for hard truths. "Are you ready to stop curating their absence?" she asked. "Peace is a place, not a promise." I told her about the bank statement and the months of polite distance. "Then, come on a Tuesday and leave the door unlocked for Wednesday," she said. "See how it feels to let your day choose you." I packed a small bag and a book I had never finished because someone always needed something. At Willow Harbor, I walked the loop around the lake every morning until my thoughts slowed to a normal pace. People greeted me by name by day 3. It surprised me how quickly a person can become known when she stops auditioning. On Thursday, a woman named Darla Reyes from the art studio asked if I would help children choose books for a weekend fair. I said yes, without checking anyone's schedule but mine. We set up tables in the community hall, and children rushed in with hands eager for stories. A boy picked a book about trains, and a girl grabbed one about stars. "Choose one you want to live in," I told them, and watched their faces change. That night, Helen and I sat on her porch with soup and silence. "You look wider," she said, "like someone opened a window in your ribs." I laughed softly and let the air move through me. Back in Asheville, I removed the formal tablecloth from the dining table and folded it away. I placed a small pottery bowl in the center and filled it with lemons. The room looked younger without the performance. Evan texted again, this time after midnight. "Mom, I'm sorry, we're stretched thin. Chloe's under pressure, and I feel like I'm failing everyone." I stared at the screen and decided not to mother the apology. "Love is not a deadline," I wrote. "Take care of your home first," he replied, with a thank you and a heart, and I let the conversation end there. I did not add it to the silence ledger. Not all entries require ink. Winter thinned into a pale spring, and I started leaving the porch light off. You can mistake that small change for nothing until you feel your shoulders drop. I met with a realtor for the first time and asked quiet questions. What would a house like mine mean to another family with less history and more Saturdays? The realtor, a gentle man named Caleb Foster, listened more than he spoke. He said, "You can sell the building, Margaret, but you will keep the home." I went back inside and touched the staircase where Evan had learned to slide down on his belly. The wood had survived joy. It would survive this too. Chloe called unexpectedly, her voice bright and oddly formal. "We're thinking of visiting soon," she said. "Things are chaotic, but Leo misses you." I said, "I miss him too," she added. "We'll let you know when we have time." I looked at the lemons on the table and felt something settle that had been wobbling for months. I understand, I said. I will be here or there, but I will be somewhere I can be known. At Willow Harbor, I stayed another week and tried a trial residency in a sunlit corner cottage. I learned the front door's creak and the lake's small vocabulary of wind. Darla introduced me to the community coordinator, who asked if I would lead a weekly reading hour. Only if we also read to ourselves, I answered, smiling. We agreed on Tuesdays. I began imagining Tuesdays as anchors instead of placeholders. On my last day of the trial, Helen slid an acceptance packet across the cafe table. There's a unit opening in May, she said softly. No pressure, but I think, peace, put your name on it. I drove home past blooming redbuds and counted the ways my life had learned to wait. The house did not argue. It simply held me while I made a new promise to myself. I would choose a place where good mornings were not rescheduled. I would move where neighbors knocked because they had pie, not because they needed a favor. I would stop budgeting my heart around other people's calendars. When I reached my street, I parked and sat in the silent car. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once and then forgot why. That night, I opened the silence ledger and turned to the last page. I wrote a single line in neat letters I recognized from every book I ever labeled. I am relocating from expectation to peace. Then I closed the cover, slid the notebook into a drawer, and slept like someone whose name had just been called. In the morning, I brewed strong tea, called Caleb, and asked him to list the house. My voice did not shake. I did not look at my phone. The porch light stayed off, and the sun found me anyway. They arrived on a bright Saturday in late May, 8 months since their last real visit. I heard the car doors and the quick, cheerful voices that people use when they are late and want to sound early. I had already stacked 3 labeled boxes by the front door, books and winter sweaters, and the photo albums I would take no matter where I slept. Chloe stepped in first, eyes scanning the room with that trained, efficient focus. "Are you redecorating?" she asked, smiling too brightly. I wiped my hands on a towel and said, "I'm simplifying." Evan kissed my cheek, glancing at the boxes as if they might explode. "Mom, you should have told us," he said quietly. Leo ran past us to the backyard and called for the old swing, and his voice saved the moment from breaking. I poured lemonade into tall glasses and placed a small plate of shortbread between us. "Let's sit," I said. "It's a good day for clear sentences." Chloe set her bag down carefully and folded her hands like someone bracing for a meeting that might go either way. We talked about small things first, the school play and the new sofa, and a neighbor's dog with a fondness for stealing mail. Then the room settled into a stillness that asked for honesty. "Mom," Evan said, "are you moving somewhere?" I nodded. "Yes." Chloe blinked. "Out of the house?" she asked. "Out of your home." I reached behind me and lifted a folder from the console table. "Into another one," I said. I slid the first page across the table, the simple white sheet with the blue letterhead from Caleb's office. "This is the listing agreement," I said. "He'll show the house starting next week." Evan stared at the paper as if it were written in a language he had not learned. Chloe's smile struggled then, the kind of smile people use when a plan gets corrected by reality. "Is this because of us?" she asked softly. I answered just as softly. "It's because of me." She searched my face for a wound and found a boundary instead. I offered the second page, the one with the lake's small crest at the top. "And this is my acceptance letter from Willow Harbor," I said. "They have a cottage for me. It faces the water." Evan rubbed his eyebrow, a habit he carried from childhood when he wanted to stall time. "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked. I could have helped. I met his eyes and let him see everything I was not blaming him for. "Because I did not need help," I said. "I needed permission, and that was mine to give." Chloe leaned forward. "You can't just decide this," she said, then caught herself. "I mean, of course you can decide, but it feels sudden." I shook my head with a small smile. "Nothing about this is sudden," I said. "It is only quiet." She looked around at the half-packed room. "But this is your history," she said. "It is," I replied. "And it will come with me in a few boxes and in my bones. The rest can become someone else's future." Evan's voice softened. "Are you angry with us?" The question hung in the room like a fragile ornament. I answered with the steadiness I had practiced for months. "No," I said. "I am finished waiting for your calendar to love me. I am moving where peace does not need an invitation." He swallowed and nodded and looked away. Chloe exhaled slowly. "I said we would visit when we had time," she murmured. I meant it kindly. I folded the listing paper once, then again, as if teaching a crease where to live. "Kindness that arrives too late still misses the meal," I said. But there is no bill on the table. She winced, then steadied herself. This feels like a punishment, she said. It is a correction, I replied. For me, not for you. Leo ran back in with grass on his knees and joy in his voice. Grandma, the swing still works, he shouted. I kissed the top of his head. Good things tend to, I said. He asked if he could take the swing to the new house, and his question reset the room. There will be a different swing, I said. And a lake that looks like it tells secrets. He grinned and asked for a cookie, and then sprinted outside again. Evan watched him go and said, He loves it here. I nodded. He will love there too. Chloe pressed her palms together. Do you have to sell? I placed my hand on the folder and felt its calm. I do not have to, I said. I choose to. She held my gaze and saw that the choice had already grown roots. I poured more lemonade and slid the plate closer, and for a moment we just listened to the creak of the swing and the small rhythm of Leo's laugh. I wrote a notebook this year, I said finally. I called it the Silence Ledger. I wrote down dates and promises and the way the house sounded when no one came. Evan closed his eyes for a second. Mom. I touched his sleeve. This is not an accusation, I said. It is a record of how I learned to move. Chloe reached for the acceptance letter with careful fingers. Willow Harbor, she read. I looked these up once, places like that. I called them retirement villages. I smiled. I call it a village for mornings. Evan managed a small laugh that sounded like his father's old humor coming home for a minute. Chloe tried again, quieter this time. Are you certain? I nodded. I have already measured the kitchen for my kettle, I said. She stared, then almost smiled. That does sound like certainty. Evan took a breath and let go of the sentence he had been holding. What do you need from us? He asked. Honesty, I said, and for you to bless a decision that does not punish you. I will not ask you to carry boxes unless you want to. I will not ask you to approve what my heart already knows. He looked at Chloe, then at me. We can come next Saturday, he said. We will help pack the books. I nodded. Books are easy. They have already practiced traveling. Chloe glanced toward the hallway, her eyes catching the doorway of Evan's old room. It is strange, she said softly. I thought you would always be here. I folded the towel neatly and placed it on the counter. I was always here, I said. That was the problem. She looked at me with something like respect. You are braver than me. I shook my head. No, I am simply done being polite to my loneliness. She drew in a breath and let it out slowly. I understand that sentence, she said. At least I think I do. I reached across and covered her hand with mine. Good, I said. Understanding is the first packed box. We walked through the house together, room by room, naming what would go and what would stay. Evan held the ladder while I took down the old wreath hook. Chloe wrapped the porcelain bird that used to sit on the piano. Leo returned with a dandelion crown and declared it royal property that must travel. In each room, I left one small object that could belong to the next family, a welcome the house deserved to give. When we reached the front door again, sunlight fell across the stacked boxes like a gentle verdict. You are really doing this, Evan said, not as a challenge but as an admission. I am, I answered. I am moving back into my life. We stood a long time without speaking. Then I handed Evan the listing copy and gave Chloe the acceptance letter to read once more. Keep these tonight, I said. Let them sit on your table where your phones usually do. If you bless me in the morning, bring them back with your signatures where they belong. Chloe blinked. What do we sign? I smiled. A note that says, we understand and we love you, and we will visit because we want to, not because time finally allows. She nodded, something steady forming behind her eyes. Evan put the papers carefully into Chloe's bag like they were breakable. At the door, Chloe turned and spoke in a voice that did not need an audience. I am sorry for how long you waited. I touched her shoulder. Waiting taught me the value of arrival, I said. I will take that lesson with me. Evan hugged me, not quickly and not half, the way a son hugs when language has limits. We will come next Saturday, he said again. Early. I kissed his cheek. Early is a beautiful word. After they left, the house did not feel abandoned. It felt agreed with. I washed the 2 lemonade glasses and set them upside down to dry. I labeled another box and wrote kitchen memories on the flap in small letters. Outside, the swing creaked once in the evening breeze, as if it were practicing goodbye. I stood at the window and whispered, you will find new laughter. The porch light stayed off. I did not wait for a car to turn around. The next morning came bright and quiet, the kind of morning that feels like it's keeping a secret for you. I woke early, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. There, next to the vase of fading lilies, lay an envelope. Evan's handwriting, steady but unsure. Inside was the listing paper, now marked with his signature, and a small note in Chloe's elegant script. "We understand. We love you. We'll visit because we want to." I held the paper against my chest and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting. Moving week unfolded in small, gentle motions. Caleb, the realtor, stopped by with a clipboard and a calm smile. "You've made this easy," he said, glancing at the neatly labeled boxes. "Most people fight their memories. You seem to have made peace with yours." I smiled. "They had their turn," I said. "Now it's Peace's turn." Helen came down from Willow Harbor to help with the final packing. She filled the house with her laughter and her favorite music, old jazz, the kind that feels like warm conversation. "I brought extra tape," she said. "It fixes everything except regret." When moving day arrived, the neighborhood gathered quietly to say goodbye. Mrs. Thompson from across the street hugged me with tears in her eyes. "I'll miss seeing your porch light," she said. "It always made this street feel lived in." I told her the truth. It was never the light that mattered, it was the waiting behind it. The moving truck hummed outside, and I watched as my boxes were carried away one by one. There was no pain, only release. I walked through each room one last time, touching the walls like a thank you. At Willow Harbor, Helen met me with fresh flowers and a key on a ribbon. My cottage was smaller, but every window opened toward the lake. The first night, I unpacked only essentials: a kettle, a book, and the framed photo of Robert smiling in the garden. The silence felt different here, alive, not heavy. I slept with the windows open and let the crickets write lullabies I hadn't heard in years. Days turned into weeks, each one a small act of rediscovery. I joined the community reading group and led a children's story hour at the library every Tuesday. The kids called me Miss Margaret, and one of them, little Nora, told me, "You read like my grandma hugs." I laughed and told her that was the highest compliment I'd ever received. On weekends, Helen and I tended the garden together. "You glow more," she said one afternoon, handing me a handful of mint. "You've stopped rationing your joy." I smiled. It was never joy I lacked. I just stopped waiting for permission to use it. Evan came to visit 2 months later, alone. He brought a small toolbox and said he wanted to fix the screen door that squeaked. We sat by the lake afterward, watching ripples move across the water. "You were right to go," he said quietly. "Chloe and we got so caught up trying to keep up. I think I forgot what time was for." I rested my hand on his. "Time isn't for keeping," I said. "It's for giving. The moment you stop hoarding it, you start living it." Before he left, I handed him a small journal wrapped in ribbon. It was the silence ledger. "Read it when you need reminding," I said. "Not of guilt, but of patience." He nodded, eyes glistening. "You really are freer now, aren't you?" I smiled. I didn't move to escape anyone. I moved to meet myself before it was too late. That evening, I walked the path along the lake, the sun dipping low and kind. I thought of Chloe, of how hard it must be to juggle love and image, and hoped she'd find her stillness too. I realized forgiveness wasn't something I'd have to give them someday. It was something I'd already given myself. If you've ever chosen peace over waiting, you know it's not loneliness you find, its arrival. The world doesn't shrink when you move forward. It widens, like the lake at sunset, calm and endless, waiting for your reflection. 6 months later, autumn brushed the lake in amber and gold, and I woke each morning to light that felt freshly invented. My cottage had grown into itself, herbs in the window, books stacked by the chair, and laughter that belonged to both me and the wind. I no longer measured my days by who might call. I measured them by warmth, by quiet accomplishments, by the sound of my own contentment. On a crisp Saturday, a small silver car pulled into the drive. Chloe stepped out, holding Leo's hand. I met them halfway down the path. Leo ran to me, his little arms fierce and certain. "Grandma," he said, breathless, "this place feels happy." I smiled, brushing his hair from his forehead. "It is, sweetheart. It's a place that remembers joy." Chloe stood a few steps back, her eyes softer than I had ever seen them. "You look different," she said, "lighter." I laughed quietly. That's what happens when peace stops waiting for permission. We sat by the water with sandwiches and lemonade. Leo tossed pebbles that skipped 3 times before sinking. Chloe watched him, then turned to me. "I used to think peace was something you found after everything else was finished," she said. "But I see now it's something you have to build while you still can." I nodded. "Exactly. Peace isn't a prize, it's a practice." She smiled faintly. "You were right about families. They can stretch without breaking if someone keeps a soft center." When they left, Leo pressed a folded paper into my hand, a drawing of the lake, my cottage, and 3 figures holding hands under a yellow sun. He'd written Grandma's House of Calm at the top. I taped it above my kitchen sink, where the morning light touches it first. That evening, I walked to the dock and watched the sunset slide across the water. The sky was endless, forgiving, and deeply kind. I whispered to the wind, "Thank you for waiting." Then I laughed softly, realizing it never had. If you've ever stopped waiting for someone else's time and found your own, tell me in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Her Voices. Your voice matters.